Hi everyone, Darren here, and today I wanted to introduce you to a game that has absolutely blown me away, and that is Highfleet. Now, Highfleet is a 2D aerial combat game with a real-time campaign. On this campaign, you're going to build and customize your elite squadron of fighters, support ships, bombers, and tankers as you launch your expedition to secure a nuclear reactor at the city of Kiva. As you move from point to point on the campaign, raiding targets, securing money and weaponry, convincing other commanders to join your cause, you're being hunted by specialized strike groups. Now, extremely powerful, you can attempt to challenge a strike group, but it really is best to avoid them, and for this, you're going to utilize stealth, gathering intel, intercepting, and correctly interpreting radio messages, all to survive. Now, when not buying weapons, designing ships, or raiding targets, you spend your time repairing, refueling, and engaging in light dialogue with different people, improving diplomacy to call on them in times of need. Based on your actions and your choices, both in missions and in dialogue, you'll be seen as a certain type of person by both potential allies and by your own crew, which can affect their morale and willingness to follow you into battle. And yes, I said designing ships. Highfleet has an enormously in-depth fleet designer letting you build a ship from scratch or modify an existing one. Guns need ammunition stores and crew to use them. Crew need crew quarters for space. This space needs extra thrust to get off the ground. More thrust needs bigger engines. Bigger engines needs more fuel tanks. Fuel tanks need protection, and all of this needs to be anchored correctly to the hull, which you design piece by piece. Now, depending on the weaponry you have, you can design small, nimble fighters, or heavily armored tankers that fuel the whole fleet, or support roles that work better for the campaign, like scouts that have long-range sensors. When building a ship, the placement of everything matters. You can actually block your own guns or even your own escape pods, or do something foolish like placing the ammunition stores or the fuel tanks on the very edges of your ship. Not a good idea. If all of that is a bit too much busy work though, you could just use the ships that are already in the game and maybe make some light adjustments when you pick up an extra weapon as time goes on. So, that is the high-level summary of Highfleet. I know there's a lot of information there and a lot of stuff happening on screen, so let's break it down just a little to talk about what you're actually doing in the moment-to-moment gameplay. Here we are on the campaign map. Now, when zoomed out, it's this very sterile, radar-like view on this CRT monitor that's refreshing and blurring every now and then, and this screen has huge amounts of information around it, all built into this immersive cockpit point-and-click style UI. Every little button, screen, or piece of information here is relevant and can be interacted with. None of it is just there for eye candy. So, let's give an example of a typical situation where we want to move from one place to another and then attack a settlement so we can get access to it. So I'm moving here from a town called Zoba to Magor. Now in the distance there's actually an enemy strike group patrolling the area, the little red icon. So just in case I need to turn around, I'm going to be purchasing much more fuel than I actually need. And as time passes, you can see as we're refueling, the range of where we can go is increasing. It's the blue ring around me. Now, on giving the order to move, we can see that it's going to take 8.5 hours to get there. I zoomed in to have a look at our ships, as I like to do that, as they move across the terrain, and we can actually see, based on the amount of ships you have, you'll see like the correct number of smoke trails and everything. So it's very immersive, everything's correct, you know? And quite quickly, after we left, we picked up a radio signal. So I opened up our receiver, tried to tune it to the right frequency, but unfortunately the signal was very delicate this time. Normally it's a nice window of degrees of where you could get it wrong, but this time it was a very fine point, and even though I tuned to the frequency correctly, I still needed then to get the bearing of the signal and lock it in, but I lost it just before I got to do that, because I took too long. Now, here's an example. If you do get the signal, you basically get this tiny piece of intel about various maneuvers or locations. The faster you lock into the signal, the better the information you get, but even then, it might just tell you that a squadron is moving at a certain speed in a certain direction. But because you know roughly where the signal came from, you can then sort of work out an estimate of where they're going to be given a certain amount of time, and the time you can figure out based on their speed. One of the messages on their own might not be that much, but if you caught a few messages over time, you'll start to work out patrol routes. If they've caught wind of you, you may also get an indication of where they think that you're going to be, and you can then divert to somewhere else. Anyways, back to our journey to Magor. Now with 4 hours left in the trip, we're reaching the point where Magor could actually alert the enemy strike groups to our presence. So, we've got a choice. Our fleet is traveling together as fast as our slowest ship in the group. At this speed, it's going to be very likely that they're going to get the word out of our approach. In fact, it's 99% likely. So, What we can do is break off a couple of our fastest ships, which are about twice as fast as the overall fleet, and get there before Magor can sound the alarm, and this has a 75% chance of success. I could go with just one ship. My very fastest ship is like 7 times faster, but it would be really weak. You know, this is meaning that we're going to launch an assault here with just 2 ships. So I'm sending 2 in the hopes that we'll actually be able to take out the garrison. As I give the go-ahead, and we send out our own sudden strike force, almost immediately we actually picked up a radar signal from the north, and that meant that that strike group we kind of knew about previously was likely closing in on us. Nevertheless, we plowed ahead and engaged the settlement garrison forces, 3 enemy ships. So here we have our first bit of combat. Combat is a 2D affair, it's a side-on view, and it's physics-based aerial combat, similar to a game like Luftrausers, where you're kind of always fighting against that downward pull of gravity. In combat, you determine the order in which your ships come into battle, and for the player, you only field 1 ship at a time, whereas the enemy can field up to 3. Now, if your ship retreats or is destroyed, then your next ship will enter the fight, or if you've taken damage, you can just retreat it out by entering a specific portion of the map, which can be very hard at times, especially if you had an engine or a thruster busted. It's really difficult to get to one of these retreat points. If you have escape pods, you can at least eject your crew if you know that the ship is going to go down. If you don't have escape pods, then, well, GG. So combat basically works by you aiming and pre-firing in the direction of enemy targets. In the top left, you have your ammo cassette constantly reloading as you aim, and several warning symbols about lock-on missiles and fires. You then have various abilities and weaponry. For instance, if you catch fire, you can attempt to put it out. You can use flares to throw off enemy missiles, you've got anti-missile defense, you can use bombs against ground targets, and you can launch airplanes to do some fighting for you. All of these are dependent on the ship class and what you've outfitted your ships with. If you didn't give them a fire suppressant, then as you might guess, a fire cannot be put out. If you don't have flares installed, then you don't have flares. There are different types of cannons and ammo types as well, and specialized limited ammo that you can purchase from merchants or find in wreckages to use as well. Now, while combat seems quite simplistic on the surface of things, it's really good fun. And because of the campaign, every bit of damage you take really does matter, and every loss is a major setback. When ships take damage, you're going to need to repair them, and this takes a few hours. If you've got an enemy on your tail, sometimes you just can't afford that to wait at a town and heal up, so there are big consequences to even the most minor skirmish. For me personally, even though it's just a 2D aerial combat game, it is extremely immersive because of the graphics and the UI. When you speed around in a ship and you pull off dangerous maneuvers, your pilot actually sort of blacks out due to G-forces darkening your whole screen. Then with the water splashes, the smoke, lightning, explosions, and glass cracks, your field of view gets crammed with all of this stuff going on, making battles feel really chaotic at times. Now, I could definitely see people being somewhat turned off by all of these kind of VFX and stuff messing with the raw gameplay, but to me, it's what makes the experience so enjoyable. That even though I'm looking at a small floating dot on my screen, I feel like I'm in a loud and bulky cockpit hearing the various weapons being crank loaded into their magazines. It's a ton of fun. Now here's when I broke out my heavy cruiser. I wanted to include it somewhere in the video. This thing was super powerful, but I actually had my radar completely busted in this fight, which gave me essentially no info on future enemy whereabouts for quite a while afterwards. So again, big consequences from breaking out the big Chad Chonky boy. So I mentioned consequences to ship damage. Now after a battle, you can choose to land specific ships so that they get a repair bonus when they enter into the shipyard. And this will mean that they repair far faster and cheaper than if you didn't land them at all. And it is possible to repair without landing, it just takes a very long time. Here's an example of my ship which had lost half of its engines. It lost its left stabilizing thrusters and its bottom right main thrusters, meaning it was a nightmare to stabilize and land. I could barely rotate it, and I had to use its right thrusters, which are actually meant for, rotating, to actually just kind of level it off and use it almost as a main thruster to stabilize it. Now, while this is just a sort of mini-game, it is a bunch of fun to manage and pull off a landing on a small platform, especially when your ship is just falling apart. You need those bonuses, else you might have to wait days to get the repairs done. Now, the next thing I want to touch on briefly is the story. The story is really well written and quite intriguing. The game's manual goes a little bit deeper into it, and it's actually full of artwork and stuff. Highly recommend checking out that manual if you get the game. It gives you so much info, and it's a joy to read. But generally speaking, here in the story, we have this sort of futuristic, post-apocalyptic setting where, for the last 2 centuries, the Romani Empire has ruled a large piece of territory called Gerat. And Gerat is made up of several cities and territories ruled by dukes, known as the Great Houses. And the city of Khiva declared itself a republic, and it's in active rebellion against the empire. Now, many of the Great Houses are joining the rebellion, and the Imperial army is greatly outnumbered. You're actually fighting for the Imperial army, and a large part of the war is being fought over the capital, where the city was actually just nuked. And the Empire have sent you out on an expeditionary force to locate a known nuclear reactor, which is one of 3 in the world, in the city of Khiva. Now, the story and setting gives me big Dune vibes, with lots of talks of houses, dukes, royalty, and mysterious characters, and faith mixing with technology. It's really cool, and it's something I'd love to see expanded in future as a setting, so even if it was a different type of game. The setting serves as a backdrop for your interactions with several characters and commanders that you can attempt to win over through dialogue options. Now, this part of the game I'm not so sold on. It's a really minor part. You don't interact with it that much, at least not from what I've played, and you'll use these different speech cards that you can raise or drop relations with characters and factions, thus increasing or decreasing your ability to then ask them for help or lend you reinforcements or money. It's not something that I've really interacted too much with yet, and while the dialogue is still good, the writing is good, I just felt the options and the card system just felt a little bit out of place. And the very last thing then, I guess, is that you can also search wreckages after battles, and depending on what you do, you could rescue crew, you could go for straight up items to sell them on the market. That reflects your rating with your own crew. You know, if you're not saving crew, your own crew are going to be a little bit unhappy with you, and they have morale. And if they have low morale, they won't fight for you. And that's it for my video on Highfleet. Quite a quick one, but really enjoying this game right now. It does, however, have one massive drawback that cannot be overlooked. It doesn't have any real graphical options or key rebinding. It doesn't seem to be ultra-wide compatible, and for me personally, I play at 1440p. The game runs in a 1080p window. If you full screen it, it just sets your monitor to 1080p, which can mess up other configurations of things. So for me, I had to select 1080p in Windows, and then the game ran just fine. Even though this is an indie developer and it's the return of micro pros, it's not really acceptable to release a PC game without consideration for different resolutions and hardware setups. So be warned, if you like customization, as of right now, the game basically has one way to play it. And if I was to guess, I'd say it's probably because of that diegetic UI. It's probably not easy to scale this to different sizes and have it work and look right. And a lot of the art actually has, like, you know, the actual keys etched into it. So maybe that's why, I don't know. Hopefully, though, they can just attempt to patch this in the future, because I think this game would do much better in reviews if it could. Currently, it's at, like, mostly positive, but I think it'd be at overwhelmingly positive if it sorted that out. Most reviews mention this as an issue. Anyways, that is all from me. Let me know what you think of the game in the comments, and if you'd like to see more like this on the channel. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, thank you very much for watching, and remember, if you want to support this series directly, you can click the join button to become a channel member. Doing so will get your name in the credits, as well as loyalty badges and emotes to use in the comments. If you don't see the join button, it means the video is being copyright claimed, but you can still join from the channel page on desktop. You can also link your account to our Discord to get a special role on there that'll give you access to the Senate House and a few other perks.